In the Middle East, collectively, we forgot what was there before the First World War. The First World War was so traumatic for the populations of the Middle East that now, a century later, we still do not know what to do with this heritage, with the heritage of the mass violence and mass transformation that took place in the First World War. But also, we do not know how to connect with the past, with the Ottoman past of these lands. Before the war, the Ottoman Empire was based on plurality, on pluralism, on having different identities, but structured in a hierarchical way, based on not equality, but based on difference and tolerance. After the First World War, we saw the emergence of different type of political systems, nation states. Those nation states thought about imposing a unified identities on their populations. Although their populations were plural, they tried to impose the idea of the Turkish nation, of the Syrian nation, of the Iraqi nation, and so on. The colonial powers brought these concepts to the Middle East. And by using concepts that were totally foreign, totally strange from the history, sociology, and culture of this area, we already created a conceptual break with the past. Plus, we had the emotional break with the Ottoman Empire that was defeated. In Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, Arab nationalist intellectuals considered the Ottoman past as a strange parenthesis where the Arab world was occupied by foreign powers. These foreign powers were the Turks. And they imagined that there was an essential Arab entity that existed before and was re-emerging afterwards by the arrival of the colonial powers, by the creation of the modern states of the Middle East, and by the desire of pan-Arab nationalism to create this vast Arab unity, because they imagined that somewhere in the past there was always the essential Arab nation. So basically we created a historical narrative which is ahistorical, which is not based on real social, political history of those nations, which was very deeply rooted in the Ottoman Empire. We point at European colonial powers to be responsible for the fate of the Middle East. And I think this is a fundamental mistake in the way the modern history of the Middle East is narrated. Because although the European colonial states, Great Britain and France, have certain responsibilities in the Middle East today, but they are a minor player. We forget that it was the Ottoman Ittihadist leadership that chose to join the First World War. They could have chosen to stay neutral in the war. So to point at external factors for the destruction of the Ottoman Empire and for the emergence of nation states, we kind of put at the second place the local actors, local contradictions, local tensions, and violence within the local societies. For example, the history of the deportations and massacres of Armenians, of Assyrians, of Ottoman Greeks was not part of the new history of the Middle East. It is still not part of the new history of the Middle East. So when the modern history of the Middle East was written, those huge events, we are talking about 20% of the population of the Ottoman Empire in 1914. And we are talking about the structure of the Ottoman political system, social system, cultural institutions. So this fundamental transformation, what we call the genocide of Armenians, the genocide of Assyrians, and so on, was completely absent from the narrative of the modern history of the Middle East. For Arab intellectuals and Arab official history, this was something that belonged to the Turks, to the Ottomans. It was not theirs. So in the official historical narrative, this past, the past existence of the Armenians, Assyrians, the Greeks had no place. But also the mass violence exercised against them was not part of the historical narrative. When in the 60s the Armenians started raising their voice and mobilizing and calling for the recognition of the Armenian genocide, Turkish official historiography moved from silence to denial. So Turkey was forced to come out of its silence And as a reaction, it articulated the denialist history and denialist position that we know today. And it's only later that intellectuals started researching and debating and looking for this past Armenian presence and its absence. But I should say that these scholarly works still remain within very few scholarly islands. Initially, it developed within the Armenian studies, so it's a very minor branch in the large school of historic thought and historic research. Today, it passed to Ottoman studies, but if we look the broader sector of Middle Eastern history, the Armenian genocide, at best, it's a footnote. I don't think it's a footnote. I think it should be at the center of modern history of the Middle East to understand the continuous mass violence and the culture of mass violence that developed in this region since the First World War and the genocide of the Armenians and the other Christian communities there. The modern Middle Eastern states, they are built around one fundamental institution. It's the military. It's the military that founded the modern Turkish Republic. It's the military that founded the modern states of Syria and Iraq. And if we go back looking at the officers and soldiers of the Syrian army, Iraqi army, Turkish army, in the years of formation, they were former Ottoman officers. And there's a fundamental question in the Middle East. Who founded those states? And what ideas and what experiences they had as individuals, but also as collectives. This was the army that had committed the first modern genocide. And it's at the same time the foundations of the emerging states in the Middle East. So are we surprised today that there's so much mass violence in the Middle East? Because this army had learned in the First World War that if you have a problem with your minorities, then you use mass violence, deportations and massacres, and then they are out of the scene and the problem is solved. Then we see that this institutional memory stayed within the states that emerged in the post-Ottoman Middle East, and then we understand where this mass violence is rooted and where it is coming from. In the Middle East today, we are in very deep crisis. This crisis is not just a political crisis, it's not just a problem of security, right? We have wars, we have conflicts. It's not just economic crisis, it's also moral and intellectual crisis. Because for decades, the message in the Middle East was that criminals are the founders of the nation. They are heroes, we should celebrate them. And this is a fundamental contradiction because today we are not able to understand what is good and what is bad, as basic as that. And partially this can be explained by the fact that for 100 years we forgot our past. We tried to put aside, forget, censor, deny our common past. And as a result, we see that the same problems, the problem of mass violence, is re-emerging and is so dominant today. By talking about the Armenian genocide, I don't think that we are asking as Armenians, but also as scholars working on the history of the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and the history of the genocide. We are not asking favors from people. We are doing favor to them because by denying this past, we can only reproduce them. Armenians are not there anymore. So this message is a positive message to all those people who want to live in a state that does not commit genocide, because a state that committed genocide and denied it will commit it again. So by working about this past, we are taking steps towards building states based on rule of law, states based on justice and equality, and we are very far from that today in the Middle East.